there's going to be a lot of information I'm going to share with you, and by all means, if there are any questions, we could reserve it at the end. I also provide a link as to where additional questions could be provided if you think of something later. About 48 million people, 1 of 6 Americans, get sick. 128,000 are hospitalized, and 3,000 die each year from foodborne diseases, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This is a significant public health that is largely preventable. The FDA Food Safety Modernization Act passed by Congress on December 21st, 2010, and signed into law by President Obama on January 4th, 2011. Enables FDA to focus more on preventing food safety problems rather than relying primarily on reacting to problems after they occur. It is clear to all of us who work on food safety that there is no silver bullet approach to making food safer. We must address all segments of the farm-to-table chain to reduce the hazards as much as feasibly possible. All of us, government, industry, and food handlers, have a role. FSMA is a major catalyst for these changes we are seeking for this time. Importance of prevention, principle of the food industry to be responsible and accountable for preventing food safety problems, the need to address hazards from farm to table, the need to address food safety from domestically produced and imported foods, and importance of partnerships. Since January 2013, we have proposed 7 foundational rules to implement FSMA. Produce safety, preventive controls for human food, preventive controls for animal food, foreign supplier verification program, third-party certification, intentional contamination, sanitary transportation. Produce safety. It is widely recognized that produce is an essential component of a healthy diet, and the safe production and harvesting of fruits and vegetables helps consumers to maintain healthy diets. However, FDA's analysis of available foodborne illness outbreak data documents 131 outbreaks associated with contaminated produce between 1996 and 2010, causing more than 14,000 illnesses and 34 deaths. FDA issued a proposed rule on January 4th, 2013, and the comment period has closed, but we have announced that we are issuing revised language on key provisions of the rule in early summer 2014. We'll be accepting additional comments on the revised provisions. Based on the input we have received, we believe that significant changes will be needed in key provisions of the produce safety rule and the preventive controls for human food affecting small and large farmers. These provisions include water quality standards and testing, standards for using raw manure and compost, certain provisions affecting mixed-use facilities, and procedures for withdrawing the qualified exemption of certain farms. The proposed rule would establish science-based standards for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding produce on domestic and foreign farms. These standards would be associated with identified routes of microbial contamination of produce, including agricultural water, biological soil amendments of animal origin, health and hygiene of farm personnel, animals in the growing area, equipment, tools, and buildings. There would be additional provisions related to sprouts. Sprouts present a unique risk because the warm, moist, and nutrient-rich conditions required to produce sprouts are the same conditions that are also ideal for the growth of pathogens. The proposed produce rule covers most fruits and vegetables while they are in the raw or natural unprocessed state. It would not apply to produce that is rarely consumed raw, produced, or personal or on-farm consumption, and those destined for commercial processing such as canning that will adequately reduce microorganisms of public health concern. The court order deadline for the final rule is October 31st, 2015. Preventive controls for human foods. This proposed rule would apply to many domestic and foreign firms that manufacture, process, pack, or hold human food. These firms will be required to have written plans that set forth how they will identify and minimize hazards. FDA would evaluate the plans and continue to inspect facilities to make sure the plans are being implemented properly. The FDA issued the proposed rule January 16, 2013, and the comment period has closed, but we have announced that we are issuing revised language on key provisions of the rule in early summer 2014. We will be accepting additional comments on the revised provisions. Each covered facility will be required to prepare, implement, and have a written safety plan, which would include the following: a hazard analysis that identifies and evaluates known and reasonably foreseeable hazards for each type of food manufactured, processed, or held at the facility. Preventive controls, which would be required to be identified and implemented to provide assurances that hazards or reasonably likely to occur will be significantly minimized or prevented. Monitoring procedures to provide assurance that preventive controls are consistently performed and records to document the monitoring. Corrective actions that would be used if preventive controls are not properly implemented. Verification activities to ensure that preventive controls are consistently implemented and are effective. Facilities that would also be required to keep the written food safety plan, including hazard analysis. They would also be required to keep records of preventive controls, monitoring, corrective actions, and verification. The court order deadline for the final rule is August 30th, 2015. Preventive controls for animal food. This rule would establish current good manufacturing practices and preventive controls for food for animals to prevent problems and improve the safety of these products, which include pet food, animal feed, and raw materials and ingredients. The FDA issued the proposed rule on October 29, 2013, and the comment period has closed, but we have announced that we are issuing revised language on key provisions of the rule in early summer 2014. We will be accepting additional comments on the revised provisions. Because the preventive controls for animal food is a companion rule for the preventive controls for human food, the proposed revisions will address similar provisions of this being revised in the latter rule. They will also address revisions related to human food byproducts and that are used in animal food, for example, brewer's grain. The proposed rule would establish for the first time the good manufacturing practices that specifically address the manufacturing, processing, packing, and holding of animal food. The new requirements would address similar safety requirements as those contained in the proposed rule for human food. These areas include hygienic personnel practices and training, facility operations, maintenance and sanitation, equipment and utensil design, use and maintenance, processes and controls, and warehousing and distribution. Each facility will be required to prepare and implement the written food safety, manufactured, processed, packed, and held at the facility. A hazard analysis that would identify and evaluate known or reasonably foreseeable hazards for each type of animal food manufactured, processed, packed, or held at the facility. Preventive controls, which would be identified and implemented to provide assurances that hazards that are reasonably likely to occur would be significantly minimized or prevented. Monitoring procedures that would prevent assurance that preventive controls are consistently performed and records to document the monitoring. Corrective actions that would be used if preventive controls are not properly implemented. Verification activities to ensure that preventive controls are consistently implemented and are effective. Firms would also be required to keep the written food safety plan, including the hazard analysis. They would also be required to keep records of preventive controls, monitoring, corrective actions, and verification procedures. Court order deadline for the final rule is August 30th, 2015. Foreign Supplier Verification Program. These proposed regulations would greatly strengthen the oversight of foods imported into the U.S. to consumers. Importers would be required to perform certain risk-based activities to verify that food imported into the United States has been produced in a manner that provides the same level of public health protection as those required for the domestic food producers. FDA issued the proposed rule July 26, 2013, and the comment period has closed. Under the proposed FSVP regulations, an importer would be required to develop, maintain, and follow an FSVP for each food it imports, which in general would need to include the following. Compliance status review. Importers will be required to review the compliance status of the food and potential foreign supplier before importing the food and periodically thereafter. Hazard analysis. Importers would be required to analyze the hazards associated with each food they import. Verification activities. Importers will be required to conduct activities that provide adequate assurances that the hazards identified as reasonably likely to occur are adequately controlled. Corrective actions. Importers would be required to review complaints they receive concerning the foods they import, investigate the cause or causes of adulteration or misbranding in some circumstances, take appropriate corrective actions, and revise their FSVPs when they appear to be inadequate. Periodic reassessment of the FSVP. Importers will be required to reassess their FSVPs within 3 years of establishing the FSVP or within 3 years of the last assessment. However, importers would have to reassess the effectiveness of their FSVP sooner if they become aware of new information about potential hazards associated with the food. Importer identification. Importers will be required to obtain a Dun & Bradstreet Data Universal Numbering System, DUNS number, for their company, and to ensure that for each food product offered for importation into the United States, their name and DUNS number are provided electronically when filing the entry with Customs and Border Protection. Record keeping. Importers will be required to keep certain records, including those that document compliance status reviews, hazard analysis, foreign supplier verification activities, investigations and corrective actions, and FSVP reassessments. Court order deadline for the final rule is October 31st, 2015. Third-party certification. This proposed rule would establish a program for accreditation for third-party auditors, also known as certification bodies, to conduct food safety audits and issue certifications of foreign facilities and the foods for humans and animals they produce. FDA issued the proposed rule July 26, 2013, and the comment period has closed. An accreditation body can be a foreign government agency or a private third party. It must also meet standards for legal authority, competency and capacity, impartiality, objectivity, quality assurance, and records procedures. The proposed rule would require accreditation bodies to assess third-party auditors for accreditation, monitor performance of the third-party auditors it accredits, and notify FDA of any change in or denial of accreditation. Assess and correct any problems in its own performance, submit reports and other notifications to FDA, protect against conflicts of interest, and maintain and provide FDA access to records. The third-party auditor can be a foreign government, foreign cooperative, or other third party. It must also meet standards for legal authority, competency, and capacity, impartiality, objectivity, quality assurance, and records procedures. FDA would require accredited auditors to ensure their audit agents are competent and objective, conduct rigorous audits, submit reports of audits used for certification purposes called regulatory audits to FDA, notify FDA upon finding any condition posing a serious risk to the public health, assess and correct any problems in its own performance, protect against conflicts of interest, and maintain and provide FDA access to records. Court order deadline for the final rule is October 31st, 2015. Intentional contamination. FDA's proposed rule on food defense would require domestic and foreign facilities to address vulnerable processes in their operations to prevent acts on the food supply intended to cause large-scale public harm. The FDA issued the proposed rule December 24th, 2013, and the comment period closes June 30th, 2014. Each facility covered by this rule would be required to prepare and implement a written food defense plan, which would include the following: identify vulnerabilities to intentional contamination aimed at large-scale public harm. Facilities may identify actionable process steps using the FDA-identified key activity types or conduct their own facility-specific vulnerability assessments. Identify and implement focused mitigation strategies to minimize or prevent such vulnerabilities. Establish and implement procedures for monitoring the focused mitigation procedures or strategies. Using corrective actions if focused mitigation strategies are not properly implemented. Verification activities would ensure that monitoring is being conducted and appropriate decisions about corrective actions are being made. Personnel would be required be trained in food defense awareness and their responsibilities for implementing focused mitigation strategies. Establish and maintain certain records, including the written food defense plan, records documenting monitoring, verification activities, and corrective actions, and documentation related to training of personnel. The court order deadline for the final rule is May 31st, 2016. Sanitary transportation. This will require those who transport food to use sanitary transportation practices to ensure the safety of food. FDA issued the proposed rule January 31st, 2014, and the comment period closes May 31st, 2014. Specifically, the proposed rule would establish requirements for the design and maintenance of vehicles and transportation equipment to ensure that it does not cause the food that it transports to become contaminated. The measures taken during transportation to ensure food is not contaminated, such as adequate temperature controls and separation of food from non-food items in the same load. Procedures for exchange of information about prior cargoes, cleaning of transportation equipment, and temperature control between shipper, carrier, and receiver. Training of carrier personnel in sanitary transportation practices. Records. Maintenance of certain procedures and records by carriers and shippers related to transportation equipment, cleaning, prior cargoes, and temperature control. The court order deadline for the final rule is March 31st, 2016. Administrative tools. As we focus on the rulemaking, the developing of guidances and compliance strategies, we have been able to effectively use new FSMA mandated authorities that are already in effect. Mandatory recall. FDA has the authority to issue a mandatory recall when a company fails to voluntarily recall unsafe food that are being asked to by FDA. We have pursued this authority twice. In February 2014, a notification of opportunity to initiate a voluntary recall letter was issued to Kazel Associated Industries, Inc. of Denver, Colorado, because of possible salmonella contamination in pet treats. The firm issued a voluntary recall in response. In November 2013, notification of opportunity to initiate a voluntary recall letter was issued to USP Labs, LLC of Dallas, Texas, because of possible adulteration of dietary supplement products. The firm initiated a voluntary recall in response. Expanded administrative detention. FDA has a more flexible standard of administratively detaining products that are potentially in violation of the law to keep them from being moved. We have used administrative detention 7 times since September 2011 against multiple types of food products, including fishery products and dietary supplements. In 6 of those cases, the products were seized or voluntarily destroyed. Suspension of registration. FDA can suspend registration of a facility if it determines that the food poses a reasonable probability of serious adverse consequences or death. A facility under this suspension is prohibited from distributing food. In November 2012, FDA suspended the foods facility registration of Sunland Inc. of Portals, New Mexico, in connection with the multi-state outbreak of Salmonella brandini linked to its peanut butter. The firm is out of business. In March 2014, FDA suspended the foods facility registration of Ruth Foods Incorporated of Kenton, Delaware, in connection with the multi-state outbreak of Listeria monocytogenes linked to its cheese products. The firm has ceased operations. The outreach. Over the past 4 years, FDA has participated in an unprecedented level of outreach to academia, consumer groups, industry, tribal governments, and its counterparts at the federal, state, and local levels in an effort to hear directly from those who will be most affected by FSMA. To date, FDA has accepted more than 500 meetings with industry and consumer groups, farmers, state, local, and tribal officials, international officials, and organizations, and the research community. Deputy Commissioner of Foods and Veterinary Medicine, Michael Taylor, traveled to the Pacific Northwest, to New England, to Mexico, to Europe, and to cities all over the United States. He and others in FDA have toured farms, factories, and held listening sessions. Our goal is to engage everyone involved in the complex supply chain that brings food from farm to table. All told, there have been more than 700 speaking engagements and meetings. Additionally, more than 26,000 people have subscribed to the FSMA email updates. We are evaluating the public comments, the input received from you and other stakeholders, and will be informed as used as valuable information and input in crafting the final form of these proposed rules. Our operational strategy. Now FDA is laying the foundation of the effective and efficient implementation of the final FSMA rules when they are issued in late 2015 and 2016. We are preparing to put in place on the ground the strategic and risk-based framework for industry oversight that is at the heart of FSMA. This will require a sea change on how we as an agency approach collaboration and oversight to achieve high rates of compliance with FSMA's prevention standards. Michael Taylor and Howard Sklamberg recently released our operational strategy for implementing FSMA. It captures in broad, high-level terms for current thinking on strategy and guiding principles of implementation. These include working closely with industry to gain widespread voluntary compliance. Food safety depends on the industry implementing science and risk-based preventive measures. Using an expanded oversight toolkit that includes commodity and sector-specific guidance, education and outreach, technical assistance, and regulatory incentives for compliance. Developing legally sufficient evidence to prove specific rule violations when judicial enforcement is the right remedy. Judicial enforcement tools include seizure, injunction, and criminal prosecution. Enhancing the public health impact of inspections by focusing on systematically preventing food contamination with targeted risk-based inspection models. There will be a wider range of inspection, sampling, testing, and data collection activities. Increasing efficiencies by training our inspection and compliance staffs to be specialists in one area, rather than covering a broad spectrum of products. Working closely with our state partners on inspection, technical assistance, and compliance. developing the skills, capacity, and processes to audit foreign supplier verification programs and hold importers accountable. And last but not least, engaging stakeholders in the private sector to help determine reasonable and practical ways to implement the new rules. Detailed plans for implementation are being carried out by the FSMA Operations Team Steering Committee, led by Roberta Wagner, CIFSAN Deputy Director of Regulatory Affairs, and Joanne Givens, ORA Central Region, Acting Regional Food and Drug Director. Steering Committee will play a key role in dialogue we will be seeking with our government partners and stakeholder communities on our FSMA implementation plans. It's important that we speak in one voice as an agency to ensure that all stakeholders' implementation is seamless. Let's see here. Technical assistance. No one involved in the implementation of this law should ever think that they are going at it alone. FDA is committed to providing technical assistance, education, and guidance. FDA has a history of collaborating and creating alliances with industry, academia, and researchers across the country to provide education and training. The alliances we are working with on the implementation of FSMA include Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance, established as part of the Institute of Food Safety and Health through FDA's grant to the Illinois Institute of Technology. The goal is to provide a standard education and training program and outreach to assist the implementation of preventive controls. Produce Safety Alliance, a collaboration between Cornell University and FDA and U.S. Department of Agriculture. The goal is to improve understanding of implementation of good agricultural practices and to develop a standard of education and training program to assist with implementation of the Produce Safety Rule. Sprout Safety Alliance, created through a partnership grant from FDA to the Institute of Food Safety and Health, goals to enhance, establish, and adoption of best practices for safe sprout production. FDA is developing a network of experts to assist businesses with questions relating to the implementation of preventive controls. FDA will establish the guidance documents to provide information on hazards and preventive controls relevant to the specific food types, including produce, nuts, cheese, and food allergens. With all this said, I'd like to also provide you these links of information that are available to you. The information on screen right now in the rulemaking process is information that will help in explaining the rules that I've just went over. There's also the FSMA homepage. If many of you are tech savvy, there's the blog. I'm not familiar with blogging, but I know that that's one mechanism, and there are other mechanisms there to acquire updated information on the FSMA rules and things that are being discussed. And also, I would encourage you to subscribe to the FSMA updates. It provides additional information and a good resource to you. Thank you.